Some people think the most dangerous words in the world are "I love you." They're wrong. The most dangerous words I ever read were, "You have 72 hours to come back." The package arrived at exactly midnight. I remember because the digital clock on my microwave changed from 11:59 to 12 o'clock the moment someone knocked on my apartment door. 3 sharp knocks. Not loud. Not aggressive. Just confident. Certain. The kind of knock that didn't ask for permission. It announced itself. I froze in the middle of my tiny kitchen, a mug of cold tea still in my hand. Nobody visited me. Nobody even knew I lived there. At least, that was what I had spent the last 11 months convincing myself. The apartment sat above an old hardware store in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland. The paint peeled from the walls. The pipes groaned every morning. The heater worked only when it felt generous. But it was mine. Or at least it felt like mine. For 11 months I had built a new life one careful step at a time. New city. New job. New friends who knew me as Charlotte Reed instead of Charlotte Moretti. Every day I woke up believing I had finally escaped the life waiting for me back in New York. Then came the knock. My pulse quickened. Slowly I walked toward the door. The hallway beyond the peephole was empty. No delivery driver. No neighbor. No stranger. Just a black box resting neatly on the welcome mat. My stomach dropped. I already knew who had sent it. I didn't need a return address. I didn't need a note. Some people leave fingerprints. Damian Moretti left certainty. I unlocked the door and pulled the package inside. It wasn't large. Maybe 12 inches long. Wrapped in matte black paper tied with a silver ribbon. Elegant. Expensive. Controlled. Just like him. For nearly a minute, I stared at it from across the room. The silence felt heavier than usual. Outside, rain tapped softly against the window. Cars hissed through puddles on the street below. Somewhere in the building, a television played faintly through thin walls. Normal sounds. Ordinary sounds. Yet none of them could quiet the feeling growing in my chest. Damian had found me. Again. My fingers trembled as I untied the ribbon. Inside the box sat a velvet case. Beneath it was a small digital timer. The screen glowed bright red. 71 hours 59 minutes and 42 seconds. The numbers immediately began counting down. I stopped breathing. Tick, tick, tick. 72 hours. 3 days. My hands moved toward the velvet case before I could stop them. When I opened it, the ring was waiting inside. My wedding ring. Platinum. Oval diamond. Simple and timeless. The ring I had left behind on a marble bathroom counter nearly a year ago. The ring I had sworn I would never wear again. My throat tightened. Memories flooded back. White roses. Candlelight. A black tuxedo. Damian's steady eyes watching me as though the rest of the world no longer existed. I slammed the case shut. No. I wasn't going back there. I wasn't going back to him. My gaze shifted to the folded piece of paper resting beneath the timer. I already knew I shouldn't read it. I opened it anyway. One sentence. Nothing more. No signature. No threat. No explanation. Just 7 words printed in clean black ink. You already know what happens when time runs out. The paper slipped from my fingers. And for the first time in 11 months, I wasn't afraid because Damian had found me. I was afraid because deep down, a part of me already knew exactly what he meant. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the red numbers burned behind my eyelids. 71 hours became 70. Then 69. The timer sat on my kitchen counter like a silent witness, counting down seconds I could never get back. By sunrise, the rain had stopped, but the knot in my stomach had only grown tighter. I left for work early, hoping routine would help. It did not. The bakery smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread. The same as every morning. Customers lined up for coffee. The register chimed. Someone laughed near the pastry display. Normal life continued all around me. Yet I felt disconnected from all of it, as if I were watching my own life through a window. Around noon, my manager called me into her office. Denise was usually cheerful. That day she looked uncomfortable. She folded her hands on the desk and avoided my eyes. "Charlotte, I am sorry," she said. "We are making some staffing changes." The words hit me before I understood them. Staffing changes. Position eliminated. Budget adjustments. Corporate decision. The explanation lasted less than 2 minutes. 11 months of work disappeared in less time than it took to frost a cake. I walked out carrying a cardboard box filled with my belongings. My coffee mug, a framed photograph of Mount Hood, a notebook filled with recipes I never planned to use. Outside, cold wind swept down the street. I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes staring at nothing. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe businesses cut positions every day. Maybe. But deep down I knew better. Damien never believed in coincidences. By the time I reached my apartment, another surprise was waiting. An envelope had been taped to my door. My hand shook as I opened it. Inside was a notice from the building owner. The property had been sold. All tenants would need to vacate within 30 days. I laughed. A short, bitter sound that did not even resemble humor. First my job. Now my apartment. The walls were closing in. Back inside, I opened my laptop. If Damien had found me, I needed to disappear faster. New city. New state. New identity if necessary. I searched apartment listings in Arizona, Colorado, even Alaska. Every application ended the same way. Unavailable. Recently rented. Listing removed. After the 5th rejection, I slammed the laptop shut. My heart pounded. Anger finally broke through the fear. This was exactly how Damien operated. Calm. Precise. Never raising his voice. Never forcing anyone to do anything. He simply arranged the world until every road led where he wanted it to go. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. Almost. Instead I answered. Silence greeted me. Not static. Not background noise. Just silence. Then a woman spoke. Her voice was soft. Older. Careful. Charlotte, she said. Do not go back to him. Every muscle in my body tightened. Who is this? I asked. You do not know me. But I know what happens to people who stay too close to Damien Moretti. The line went dead before I could say another word. I stared at the phone. Then at the timer across the room. 67 hours remained. And for the first time since opening that black box, I began to wonder whether running away had ever truly been my choice. The next morning I made a decision. If Damien wanted me back, then I would leave before he could tighten the net any further. I packed 2 suitcases before sunrise. Clothes, documents, cash, everything that mattered fit into less than 50 pounds of luggage. That realization hurt more than I expected. 11 months of building a new life and it could still be packed into the trunk of a sedan. By 8 o'clock I was on the road heading east. The sky hung gray above the interstate. Pine trees blurred past my windows. For the first hour I almost felt hopeful. Distance had always been my solution. Every time fear appeared, I put miles between myself and the problem. It had worked before. Then my phone rang. Unknown number again. I ignored it. A text appeared seconds later. Safe travels, Charlotte. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I nearly missed my exit. There was no signature. None was needed. My pulse pounded so loudly I could hear it above the tires. He knew where I was. Of course he did. Damien always knew. I drove another 100 miles before stopping at a gas station outside a small town. The digital timer remained in my purse. 61 hours left. I hated myself for checking. Inside the convenience store, I bought coffee and stood near the window watching traffic. Every dark SUV made my stomach twist. Every stranger felt suspicious. I was turning into someone I barely recognized. Fear does that. It reshapes you slowly until even your own reflection feels unfamiliar. Back in the parking lot, I noticed a folded piece of paper tucked beneath my windshield wiper. My breath caught. Nobody had been near my car when I parked. Slowly I unfolded it. The handwriting was elegant. Familiar. There was only one sentence. You are driving away from the wrong person. I crushed the paper in my fist. Anger flared hot enough to cut through the fear. Damien thought he could control everything. He thought he could decide where I lived, where I worked, what choices I made. For 11 months I had blamed him for every shadow in my life. Every nightmare. Every reason I had run. Yet something about the message unsettled me. You are driving away from the wrong person. Not come back. Not obey me. Not even a threat. Just a warning. By late afternoon, clouds gathered again. Rain streaked across the windshield as I crossed into Idaho. I booked a motel room under a fake name and paid cash. The building sat beside a lonely highway exit. Exactly the kind of place nobody would think to search. Or so I told myself. An hour after checking in, someone knocked on my door. My heart nearly stopped. I stood frozen beside the bed. One knock. Then another. Finally, a woman's voice came through the door. "Charlotte, it is me. The woman from the phone. I need to talk to you before he finds you." Every instinct told me not to open that door. But another instinct whispered something even more dangerous. What if she was telling the truth? What if the person I had spent 11 months running from was not the person I should fear at all? When I opened the motel room door, the woman looked nothing like I expected. She was in her late 50s, dressed in a simple navy coat with silver hair tucked neatly behind her ears. She did not look dangerous. She looked tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying secrets for too many years. Her name was Evelyn Carter. At least that was what she told me after stepping inside. For nearly 2 hours, she talked while rain tapped against the motel window. She spoke about Damien's business rivals, about powerful families, about hidden agendas, about people who wanted access to the Moretti name and everything attached to it. By the time she finished, my head ached. Part of me believed her. Part of me did not. Then she handed me a folder. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were copies of emails, financial records, travel schedules, dates, names. One name appeared again and again. Ethan Hayes. My older brother. I stared at the page until the letters blurred. No, that was impossible. Ethan had always protected me. After our parents died, he became my entire world. He was the person I trusted most. The person who stood beside me at my wedding. The person who warned me that Damien was dangerous. My stomach tightened. "There has to be a mistake," I whispered. Evelyn shook her head slowly. I thought the same thing when I first saw the evidence. I kept turning pages. Every document made my chest feel heavier. Meetings I never knew happened. Financial transfers connected to companies Ethan supposedly had nothing to do with. Conversations that painted a picture completely different from the man I thought I knew. None of it made sense. Unless one thing was true. Unless Ethan had been hiding something from me all along. Outside, thunder rolled across the dark sky. I barely noticed. My mind had already traveled back to my wedding night. Back to the moment everything began to fall apart. I remembered receiving an anonymous message just hours after the ceremony. A warning. A photograph. Evidence that appeared to prove Damien had betrayed my trust. I remembered confronting Ethan afterward. I remembered his certainty. His anger. His insistence that I leave before it was too late. At the time I never questioned him. Why would I? He was my brother. But now, sitting on the edge of that motel bed, a terrible possibility began to emerge. What if the evidence had never been real? What if someone had wanted me to see it? What if Ethan had not protected me from Damien? What if he had separated us on purpose? The room suddenly felt smaller. The air felt thinner. I reached for my phone with shaking fingers. 48 hours remained on the timer. Exactly 48. At that moment, the screen lit up with a new message. Unknown number. My heart stopped when I opened it. There was no threat. No demand. Only a photograph. Damien stood alone on the balcony of our old Manhattan penthouse, staring toward the city skyline. The timestamp showed it had been taken less than 10 minutes earlier. Beneath the image were 6 words. "I never stopped looking for you." And for the first time in 11 months, I was no longer certain that I had been running from the right man. The photograph stayed on my screen long after the message arrived. I must have stared at it for 10 minutes. Maybe longer. Damien looked exactly the same. Dark suit. Calm expression. The city lights behind him blurred into gold and silver streaks across the glass. Yet something felt different. For the first time, I was not looking at him through fear. I was looking through doubt. Doubt about everything I thought I knew. Evelyn left before midnight. She said she needed to stay invisible. Before leaving, she placed one final item on the table. A flash drive. She told me to watch the contents alone. Then she disappeared into the rain. I locked the motel room door and sat on the edge of the bed. 47 hours remained. The timer seemed louder now, even though it made no sound at all. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. There were dozens of files, emails, financial records, security reports. Most of it meant nothing to me. Then I found a video. The timestamp showed it had been recorded the night of my wedding. My pulse quickened. Slowly I pressed play. The footage came from a security camera overlooking a private hallway inside the hotel. I watched myself walk past the camera. A few minutes later, Ethan appeared. He stopped outside a conference room and entered. Then another figure arrived. Damien. The two men spoke for nearly 20 minutes. There was no audio, no way to hear the conversation. But I could read enough from their faces to understand one thing. They were arguing. Not as enemies. As men who believed they were protecting something important. At the end of the recording, Damien handed Ethan a folder. Ethan took it and left. I replayed the scene 3 times. My brother had told me he barely spoke to Damien that night. He said they hated each other. He said Damien never trusted him. Yet the video told a different story. My chest tightened. I opened another file. Then another. Piece by piece, the version of events I had carried for 11 months began to crack. Not collapse. Not yet. But crack. At 2 in the morning, exhaustion finally forced me to stop. I stepped outside onto the motel balcony. The storm had passed. Cool air drifted across the empty parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train horn echoed through the darkness. I wrapped my arms around myself and stared at the stars. Then I heard a familiar voice behind me. Charlotte. My entire body froze. Slowly I turned. Damien stood at the far end of the balcony. Alone. No security. No entourage. No dramatic entrance. Just Damien. His hands rested inside his coat pockets. His expression remained unreadable. 40 feet separated us. Felt like 40 miles. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he broke the silence. You look tired. Of all the things he could have said, that was not what I expected. Anger should have come first. Accusations. Demands. Instead, he sounded almost concerned. I took a cautious breath. You found me. A faint smile touched the corner of his mouth. Charlotte, I found you 11 months ago. I simply waited for you to start asking the right questions. And in that moment, I realized the countdown had never been about forcing me to come back. It had been about giving me enough time to discover the truth. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The cold night air drifted between us while the motel sign buzzed faintly overhead. I had imagined this moment 100 different ways during the past 11 months. In every version, Damien was angry, demanding, unforgiving. Instead, he looked tired. Not physically tired. Something deeper. The kind of exhaustion that settles into a person's eyes when they have been carrying the same burden for too long. I crossed my arms tightly, partly because of the cold, mostly because I needed something to hold together. If you knew where I was, why did you not come get me? I asked. Damien studied me for a moment before answering. Because bringing you back was never the problem. Making you believe me was. The words hit harder than I expected. I wanted to argue. Wanted to remind him of everything that had happened. Every reason I had left. But doubt had already taken root. And doubt is dangerous. Once it appears, it refuses to leave. Damien stepped closer, reducing the distance between us by only a few feet. Still careful. Still controlled. The folder Ethan received on our wedding night, he said quietly. Do you know what was inside? I shook my head. Proof that someone inside my organization was feeding information to competitors. Someone close to both of us. I felt my stomach tighten. Ethan? Damien did not answer immediately. That silence told me everything. No. I whispered. Damien's expression remained calm. Charlotte, I spent months hoping I was wrong. Ethan was your brother. I knew what he meant to you. I did not want the evidence to be true. My chest felt hollow. Memories flashed through my mind. Birthday parties. Family dinners. Long phone calls after our parents died. Ethan teaching me how to drive. Ethan walking me down the aisle. Ethan warning me about Damien again and again. Suddenly, those memories no longer felt solid. They felt fragile. Like photographs fading around the edges. Then my phone vibrated. Both of us looked down. A new message had arrived. Unknown number. My pulse quickened as I opened it. Attached was a photograph taken less than an hour earlier. Evelyn, the woman who claimed she was helping me. She stood beside a man exiting a black car. Even before I zoomed in, I recognized him. Ethan. My breath caught. The timestamp glowed in the corner of the image. Current. Recent. Real. Beneath the photograph was a single sentence. Ask yourself why they wanted you afraid. My knees nearly gave out. 11 months. 11 months spent running, hiding, rebuilding, grieving a marriage I believed had been built on lies. And now, for the first time, I had proof that the people guiding my choices might have been working together all along. I looked up at Damien. He was already watching me. Not with triumph. Not with satisfaction. Something else. Sadness, maybe. I do not understand, I admitted. Damien nodded slowly. I know. Then he glanced toward the glowing timer visible through my motel room window. 42 hours remained. The red numbers continued counting down. But suddenly, the deadline felt far less important than the question now echoing through my mind. If Ethan and Evelyn had been manipulating the story from the beginning, what else had they lied about? After Damien spoke, neither of us returned to the motel room immediately. We stood beneath the cold night sky while questions circled endlessly through my mind. 42 hours remained on the timer, yet time no longer felt like the thing chasing me. The truth was, every memory involving Ethan now carried a shadow I had never noticed before. Every warning, every piece of advice, every moment he told me to be careful around Damien. What if none of it had been about protecting me? What if it had been about controlling where I looked? Eventually, Damien opened the motel room door and stepped aside so I could enter first. The gesture was small, ordinary, yet it reminded me of the man I married rather than the man I had spent 11 months fearing. Inside, the timer continued its silent countdown. The red numbers reflected against the dark window glass. Damien remained near the door. He did not move closer. He did not pressure me. He simply waited. Finally, I asked the question that had been haunting me since this began. Why did you send the countdown? His eyes met mine. Because if I had shown up on your doorstep 11 months ago, you would have run. If I had explained everything, you would not have believed me. You trusted him. Not me. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. There was no arrogance. No frustration. Only acceptance. As though he had already made peace with being misunderstood. I looked down at the photograph of Ethan and Evelyn on my phone. Did you know she was involved? Damien nodded slowly. Not at first. We only connected the pieces recently. The room fell silent again. Then something unexpected happened. Damien looked away. It was only for a second, but I noticed it. For the first time since I had known him, he seemed uncertain. Vulnerable. The realization unsettled me more than anything else. You could have forced me back, I said quietly. His expression hardened immediately. Never. The answer came so fast it startled me. Never, Charlotte. I might move mountains to find you. I might spend every resource I have protecting you. But I would never force you to stay beside me. The conviction in his voice left no room for doubt. Suddenly, all the assumptions I had built my escape upon began collapsing one after another. I had spent months believing Damien wanted control. Yet standing before me was a man who had waited nearly a year because my choice mattered more to him than the outcome. The weight of that realization settled heavily inside my chest. My phone vibrated again. Another message. Another unknown number. This time it contained a location. A private airfield outside Boise. Beneath it were 7 simple words. Come alone if you want the truth. I stared at the screen. Then at Damien. His jaw tightened the moment he read the message. For the first time that night, genuine fear appeared in his eyes. Not fear for himself. Fear for me. And in that instant I understood something that changed everything. Damien was not afraid of losing the fight. He was afraid of losing me before I finally learned why he had never stopped waiting. 36 hours remained when we arrived at the private airfield. Dawn painted the horizon in pale shades of gold and blue. The runway stretched across the empty landscape like a line between the past and the future. I stepped out of the car and immediately spotted Ethan. For a moment, everything else disappeared. He was still my brother. Still the person who taught me how to ride a bicycle. Still the person who sat beside my hospital bed when I broke my arm at 12 years old. My chest tightened. Memories can survive even when trust does not. Ethan gave me a small smile as I approached. "Charlotte," he said softly. "I am glad you came. I wanted answers. Nothing else." "Why?" I asked. The word escaped before I could stop it. "Why did you lie to me?" His expression faltered. For several seconds he looked older than I had ever seen him. Then he sighed. "Because I thought I was protecting you." I shook my head. "No. Protecting me would have meant letting me choose." The silence that followed felt endless. Slowly the truth emerged. Not through dramatic confessions or shocking revelations. Through small admissions. Half-finished sentences. Regret. Ethan believed Damien's world would eventually consume me. He convinced himself that separating us was the only way to save me. Evelyn helped him create the illusion that my marriage was built on deception. What began as fear eventually became manipulation. What began as concern became control. Listening to him hurt more than I expected. Not because I hated him. Because part of me understood how easily love can become something unhealthy when mixed with fear. When he finished speaking, nobody said anything for a long time. The morning wind moved across the runway. A small plane sat quietly in the distance. The world felt strangely still. Finally, Ethan looked at me and lowered his eyes. "I am sorry, Charlotte." The words were simple, honest, and somehow that made them harder to hear. Tears blurred my vision. I did not know whether forgiveness would come today. Maybe not tomorrow either. Some wounds need time. But for the first time I was standing inside the truth. And that mattered. Hours later, Damien and I returned to New York. The timer showed less than 1 hour remaining. We stood together inside the penthouse overlooking the city skyline. The same skyline from the photograph he sent me days earlier. The countdown reached its final minute. 59 seconds. 58. 57. Damien watched the numbers without speaking. Then he turned toward me. His voice was calm. "If you want to leave again, I will not stop you." The timer reached 10 seconds. 9. 8. I stared at him. At the man I had spent 11 months running from. The man who could have used power but chose patience. The man who waited for me to find the truth instead of forcing me to accept it. 3. 2. 1. The timer reached 0. Silence filled the room. Damien smiled faintly. Then he asked the question that mattered most. "Why did you come back?" I felt tears gather in my eyes as I looked out across the city lights. Then I looked at him. Because I finally learned the difference between being controlled and being cared for. And because after all this time I finally know where home is.